They thought I would die on that deserted island. They believed that leaving me behind in the middle of the sea would be enough to swallow my $3.6 billion fortune. Yet if you are hearing my voice now, it means I returned. I am alive, and with my breath comes a truth they never imagined I could tell. My heart still beats with the memory of betrayal, sharp and unrelenting. But to understand the cruelty of it, you must see where it began. Let us go back for a moment, before the silence of the island, back to the glittering deception that wrapped itself around me like velvet. The yacht was a palace upon water, all polished wood and gleaming chrome. Glasses of wine sparkled in the sunlight, and soft music floated through the evening air. I remember the laughter that rose around me, practiced and perfect, like a performance for an audience unseen. To the world, it looked like a family holiday, a celebration of togetherness after years of hard work and sacrifice. To me, it was meant to be the beginning of peace. Yet beneath the satin and the polished silverware, shadows stirred. I felt them, but I did not name them, not yet. I stood at the edge of the deck, watching the waves dance against the hull, and for a brief second I allowed myself to believe the illusion. But illusions cannot hold when truth presses against them, waiting for the moment to break free. The yacht slowed to a gentle halt, the sound of the engine fading until only the rush of waves and the cry of gulls filled the air. We had arrived at what they called a hidden gem, a deserted island untouched by tourists. The sand glistened white, the palms swayed lazily, and for a fleeting moment I thought it was simply another stop on our family adventure. But as we stepped onto the shore, I felt her presence draw closer. My daughter-in-law leaned in, her perfume sweet but cloying, her smile radiant as though carved for a photograph. Her eyes, however, betrayed something darker, a spark of cruelty I had not wished to see. She whispered with deliberate softness, her breath warm against my ear. "You love the sea so much. Stay forever and make friends with Monkey." For a heartbeat I could not move. The words cut deeper than a knife, cloaked in false sweetness but heavy with venom. Around us, the laughter of the others rang out as they set down baskets and blankets, but in my ears it was drowned by the echo of that whisper. My chest tightened, my breath caught, and I turned my gaze toward my son. He stood near the water, silent, his back to me. No protest, no defense, only silence. It was that silence that pierced me more than her words. It was consent without courage, betrayal without even the courtesy of voice. In that instant, the illusion of family shattered, leaving me staring into the raw truth of abandonment. I built my life with hands that never rested, brick by brick, bottle by bottle, shade by shade of color. From a modest shop in a small town, I grew a cosmetics empire that reached every corner of America. Women trusted the creams and powders I created. They trusted me, and for decades my name stood for beauty, resilience, and independence. When my husband passed, I thought I would wither, but instead I worked harder. Success became my shield against grief, and slowly it became my identity. Years later, when I sold the company, the number startled even me. $3.6 billion. More than a figure, it was the weight of my entire life's labor. I told myself the sale was the beginning of peace. I imagined mornings by the ocean, evenings with books, freedom from the ruthless pace of boardrooms. I thought old age would finally grant me rest. Yet rest is not what they saw when they looked at me. My son and his wife did not see a mother, a mentor, or a survivor. They saw prey. In their eyes, my fortune was a prize waiting to be seized, a treasure chest they had already divided in their minds. I whispered inside myself the truth I did not want to face. But in their eyes, my wealth was nothing more than bait, and I was nothing more than an obstacle. My son was once the kind of boy who held my hand tightly when crossing the street, who studied late into the night and promised he would make me proud. I raised him to value patience and discipline, yet somewhere along the path, those lessons slipped away. Now he chases quick fortunes, glued to screens flashing numbers and charts, pouring money into coin schemes and high-risk stocks. When that failed to satisfy his hunger, gambling filled the void. I saw the restless light in his eyes, a desperation that had nothing to do with ambition, and everything to do with greed. Beside him, my daughter-in-law played her part with practiced grace. She smiled sweetly, called me mother with a voice coated in sugar, brought me tea, and asked after my health. But her eyes betrayed calculation, darting whenever money was mentioned, sharp as a blade beneath silk. She spoke softly about family unity, yet her questions always circled back to accounts, investments, and access. She wanted control, not companionship. The conversations at dinner grew darker over time. Between bites of steak and sips of wine, they let slip phrases that chilled me. When you are no longer here, when the estate passes, when things are finally settled. Each word was wrapped in false concern, but the meaning was plain. They were building a future where I did not exist. I sat there smiling faintly, my fork steady, but inside I felt the crack forming, the fracture in what once was family. It was a Sunday morning when the idea was first laid upon the table. My daughter-in-law, with her polished smile and tone as light as honey, suggested we should try something different. A family adventure on the open sea, she said. A yacht trip to explore untouched beaches where no one else had been. Her words floated like music, carrying promises of togetherness, of laughter under the sun. My son leaned forward almost too quickly, his eyes gleaming with a spark I had not seen in years. He spoke with an eagerness that felt rehearsed, insisting how refreshing it would be, how this would heal the distance that had grown between us. Inside me, hope stirred. I imagined mornings of sea breeze, afternoons of shared meals, nights when the stars might remind us of simpler times. I longed to believe that such a journey could stitch back the torn fabric of family. Yet something in their enthusiasm pressed too hard, like a smile stretched beyond comfort. They spoke of the island as though it had been waiting for us, described every detail with uncanny precision. I told myself not to doubt. After years of strain, maybe this was their way of reaching out. Maybe love could still be found beneath the rubble of ambition and greed. But in truth, I was already stepping onto the stage of their carefully planned performance. What I thought was a chance at warmth was nothing more than a trap, waiting with open arms. The yacht glided over calm waters, sunlight shimmering on the deck as laughter rose like a chorus rehearsed for strangers. Cameras clicked, glasses clinked, and to anyone watching from afar, we looked like the perfect family on a perfect holiday. My daughter-in-law leaned close for pictures, her arm draped around my shoulder, her smile wide enough to blind. Yet each time her eyes flicked toward me, I caught the glint beneath the polish, a spark of contempt that cut deeper than words. It was the look of someone already counting their victory, rehearsing their triumph before the curtain even lifted. My son, once the boy who shared every secret with me, now barely met my gaze. He busied himself with the music, with the bottles, with the horizon. Whenever I tried to catch his eyes, he looked away, his silence louder than any insult. It was not the silence of peace but of collusion, as if his every breath agreed with the plan I had yet to name. I raised my glass when they raised theirs. I smiled when they demanded it. I played the role of mother in their charade. But inside, unease coiled tight, whispering that something beneath the surface waited to strike. The ocean stretched endlessly, the sky vast and blue, and still I felt trapped in a cage invisible to all but me. The performance glittered on, but I could taste the poison hidden in every laugh. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the waves in shades of gold, my daughter-in-law approached me with a smile as polished as the silverware on the table. She spoke lightly, almost playfully, about the challenges of managing accounts during travel, how unpredictable the sea could be, how convenient it would be if I signed a temporary power of attorney. Just a small paper, she said, nothing permanent, just to make things easier while we were away. Her tone was sweet, but beneath it I heard the faint clink of chains waiting to close. I placed my glass down slowly, my fingers steady though my heart shifted within my chest. I told her no, not now, not necessary. My words were gentle, but my refusal was firm. She laughed it off, nodding as if she had only been joking, but I saw the flicker of annoyance darken her eyes. My son sat nearby, silent, pretending to scroll his phone, but his stillness betrayed awareness. He knew, and his silence was its own answer. I chose to say nothing more, letting the evening drift back into music and laughter. Yet inside me, a quiet alarm began to toll. I told myself it was caution, that I was only being wary, but the truth pressed harder. I did not know then that this request, wrapped in silk, was only the first stone laid on the path toward betrayal. What seemed like an innocent journey was already the opening act of a merciless play. The sea stretched endlessly around us, yet on that yacht the air felt strangely confined. Each time I stepped onto the deck, the breeze catching at my hair, I noticed the same shift. My son and his wife would lower their voices or stop speaking altogether, their eyes darting to meet each other in quick, sharp glances. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that made you feel like an intruder in your own home. I stood there longer than necessary, letting them squirm beneath my gaze, though they tried to mask it with laughter that never reached their eyes. At dinner, the tension thickened. The table gleamed with crystal glasses and silver cutlery, a feast laid out as if we were royalty adrift on the waves. Yet beneath the glitter, words cut sharper than knives. My daughter-in-law leaned back in her chair, her voice light, almost playful. The younger generation like us will know how to use money to multiply, not let it sleep like you do. The words were wrapped in a smile, but their sting settled deep. My fork hovered midair as I studied her face, flawless in its performance, eyes daring me to respond. I said nothing. My son laughed awkwardly, swirling his wine as if drowning in its red depths, avoiding my eyes as he always did now. The conversation drifted back to shallow pleasantries, but the crack in the mask had already shown. The night continued with clinking glasses and empty jokes, yet beneath every sound pulsed the truth I could no longer ignore. I noticed it when he thought I was not looking. A folder slipped from his bag, papers neatly tucked inside with a label that caught my eye. Power of attorney. My son moved quickly, too quickly, shoving it back beneath his jacket as if it were nothing more than a receipt. When I asked, his wife was the one who answered, her tone sweet and casual. "Just for emergencies, Mother," she said, "in case something unexpected happens while we are away." My son nodded silently beside her, his lips pressed tight as if sealing a truth he dared not speak. I smiled faintly and let the moment pass. I did not question further, did not let them see the tremor that rippled inside me. I have lived long enough, built empires and buried enemies, to know what it means when someone hides a contract in their coat. It means the decision has already been made, the stage already set. The words emergencies were nothing but perfume masking the stench of betrayal. As the evening wore on, I sat among them, my hands calm on the table, my eyes soft as if lulled by the rhythm of the waves. Inside, however, I was drawing lines, marking shadows, preparing my silence as a weapon. They thought my age made me blind, that years dulled my senses, but experience sharpens in ways youth cannot imagine. I said nothing, but I stored every detail. She slipped her arm through mine as if we were the closest of companions, her touch light, her perfume lingering sweet in the evening air. Her voice carried the gentleness of a daughter, warm enough to fool anyone listening nearby. "Mother, you really should let us handle everything. You only need to enjoy yourself." The words might have softened another woman, but not me, for in that instant, when her lips curved into sweetness, her eyes betrayed her. A flash, quick but sharp, of disdain that chilled me more than the ocean breeze. I felt the hairs on my neck rise. My heart kept its steady rhythm, but my body stiffened beneath her grasp. I turned my head slightly, as though searching the horizon, just so she would not see the flicker of recognition in my own gaze. I had seen contempt before in boardrooms, in rivals who underestimated me. I knew it well. To find it now in my own daughter-in-law, wrapped in feigned affection, was a betrayal of a different magnitude. My son stood a few steps away, his posture awkward, his hands shoved into his pockets. He did not meet my eyes. He had once looked at me with pride, even with love. Now he looked at nothing at all. That silence, that refusal to confront, spoke louder than words ever could. I felt it then, the truth pressing in, that I was not among family anymore, but among actors waiting for their scene to begin. She clapped her hands together, as if struck by sudden inspiration, her smile glowing with innocence that no one else seemed to question. "Ahead there is a deserted beach," she announced, "so beautiful, so untouched. Why don't we stop for a little picnic, take some photos to remember this trip?" Her tone was playful, almost childlike, yet her eyes sparkled with something sharper. My son immediately nodded, his agreement spilling too quickly, his eagerness louder than it should have been. The crew began adjusting the course without hesitation, the yacht turning toward the promise of white sand and quiet waves. I felt a pause inside me, a faint resistance. Something in the speed of it all was wrong, too smooth, too rehearsed. But when I looked around, I saw only smiles, heard only voices of excitement. Even my own son, who once sought my approval before every decision, now seemed intoxicated by her suggestion, urging me to agree. For a heartbeat, I wondered if I was being paranoid, if years of guarding fortunes had made me see ghosts in every shadow. So I forced a smile and nodded, though my chest tightened. Perhaps it would be good to touch the earth again, to feel sand beneath my feet, to capture a photograph where we looked like a family at peace. They thought I was blind to the currents moving beneath the glitter of the trip. They thought my smile meant surrender, that my silence was ignorance. But I had lived long enough to recognize the tremor of deceit. It was in the way my daughter-in-law's laughter rang too sharp, echoing a second longer than needed. It was in the way my son's shoulders stiffened each time I tried to meet his eyes, the way he turned away as though my gaze might burn through the shield he tried to keep. The chill in him was unmistakable, a distance colder than the ocean wind. I sat quietly on the deck, the sun setting in ribbons of fire across the horizon, and let them believe I was lulled by the view. Inside, unease coiled tighter with every heartbeat. My instincts, sharpened by decades of battles in boardrooms and betrayals dressed as handshakes, told me something was already set in motion. I could not yet name the shape of the danger, but I felt its shadow stretch long across the deck, reaching for me with unseen hands. We stepped off the yacht onto the sand that shimmered white under the sun. The air was heavy with salt and the rustle of palm leaves. They spread out a blanket, unpacked baskets of fruit and wine, and laughter rose around me as if this were nothing more than a family picnic. My daughter-in-law hovered close, her hand brushing mine every so often, her voice sweet with concern. "Mother, you should walk a little further into the grove," she urged. "There is a beautiful view past the palms, perfect for photos." Her insistence was strange, too eager, as though the scenery mattered more than the meal or the company. I felt a flicker of unease, a whisper inside telling me to stay with the others, but her smile pressed against me like a hand on my back. My son added nothing, only nodded absently, sipping his drink as if lost in thought, yet I saw the shadow of agreement in his eyes. I rose slowly, brushing sand from my dress, and let her guide me toward the narrow path lined with coconuts and tangled roots. She pointed ahead with exaggerated excitement, her laughter bright but hollow. Each step into the grove deepened my doubt. The air grew quieter, the sound of waves dimming behind us, replaced by the creak of branches. I forced a smile, though my chest tightened. I had begun to sense that something was wrong, but I never imagined they meant to turn this paradise into my grave. I rested for a moment beneath the shade of a crooked palm, the rough bark pressing into my back as I tried to steady my breath. The air was heavy, and I thought perhaps they would bring me water or wait beside me. Instead, I felt the shift, the sudden retreat of footsteps. I lifted my head just in time to see my daughter-in-law tugging at my son's arm, pulling him back toward the beach with a quickness that betrayed urgency. My voice caught in my throat, unspoken, as their figures shrank against the brightness of the sand. I turned fully then, and the sight struck me like a blow. The yacht waited at the shore, gleaming like a jewel, and they were climbing aboard without hesitation. My heart lurched, disbelief choking me more than the heat. I stood frozen as the crew pulled up the ladder, the hum of the engine swelling in my ears. My daughter-in-law looked back once, her smile sharp and cruel, her lips curving around words meant only for me. Stay forever and make friends with Monkey. The sound of it slithered into me, colder than any blade. My chest tightened, and the strength drained from my limbs. That smile, sweet on the surface but rotting beneath, cut deeper than betrayal itself. In that instant, I was no longer a mother or a guest on holiday. I was prey, left behind to the mercy of silence, the jungle, and the endless sea. He did not look at me, not once. My son, the child I had carried, the boy I had fed and clothed and guided through every storm of his youth, stood with his back turned. His shoulders were rigid, his jaw set, and with a single motion of his hand he signaled the captain. The anchor lifted, the engine roared, and the yacht began to move away from the shore. I wanted him to glance back, even for a heartbeat, to see me standing there on the sand. But he kept his gaze on the horizon, refusing me even the mercy of acknowledgement. The waves churned between us, and the distance grew wider with each second. I felt my throat tighten, not from the salt air but from the weight of betrayal. Enemies I could fight, rivals I could crush. But my own son's silence was a blade I could not defend against. It was not her words that killed me, not her smile sharpened into cruelty. It was his quiet agreement, his refusal to speak, his surrender of loyalty to greed. On that shore, as the yacht shrank into the distance, I died once already, not in body, but in spirit, as the bond of blood broke like glass under pressure. The boy I raised was gone, replaced by a man who chose wealth over his mother. The sea roared around me, but inside there was only silence, cold and merciless. On the deck of the yacht, the laughter had already faded into whispers. My daughter-in-law leaned close to the captain, her voice low but crisp. "We will tell them she wandered off on her own," she said, "lost among the endless islands." My son nodded, his expression tense yet determined, and together they rehearsed the lie as though it were a speech to be given on stage. "Prepare a notice of urgent search," she added. "We must look like the grieving children, desperate to find her." The captain's uneasy glance lingered, but the promise of money kept his lips sealed. I could almost imagine their conversation as the yacht pulled farther away, their plans spoken over the hum of the engine. They would return with faces pale, eyes full of practiced sorrow. They would play the role of innocents, of victims themselves, and no one would suspect the truth hidden beneath their polished masks. On the island, I collapsed onto the sand, the grit clinging to my palms, my body drained of strength. I watched the vessel shrink into a speck, swallowed by the horizon. My chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, not from heat or hunger, but from the crushing weight of betrayal. 2 days passed in a blur of hunger and thirst, the sun scorching my skin by day, and the cold gnawing at my bones by night. I clung to the thought that perhaps this was the end they wished for me. Then, just as my strength faltered, I heard the creak of oars and the murmur of a voice carried by the wind. A small fishing boat appeared from behind the rocks, its hull weathered, its nets heavy with the sea's gifts. The fisherman's eyes widened as he saw me staggering on the shore, my dress torn, my lips cracked. Without hesitation, he pulled me aboard, his rough hands steady and kind, and carried me away from the island that had nearly become my grave. At the coastal medical station, I lay on a narrow bed, the smell of iodine filling the air. My body was weak, my breath shallow, yet my mind blazed with clarity. I listened to the whispers of nurses who could not believe the story of the wealthy woman abandoned on a deserted island. They pitied me, but I needed no pity. What I needed was resolve. My son and my daughter-in-law thought the sea would swallow me whole, burying me in silence and salt. But the sea had delivered me instead, placing me back into the world with a chance they never imagined I would have. It was not just survival, it was the beginning of my counterattack. News of my rescue traveled quickly along the coast, and within hours, uniformed officers of the Coast Guard appeared at the clinic. Their questions were precise, their notebooks open, their pens scratching with every word I gave them. I spoke carefully, not yet revealing all I suspected, but enough to let them know I had not wandered away by accident. They promised to begin their investigation at once. Soon after, I overheard the first whispers of what they had already uncovered. The yacht's GPS log, examined line by line, told a damning story. The vessel had anchored near the island only briefly before pulling away at full speed, its course unbroken, its direction steady back toward the mainland. There was no sign of a search, no circling back, no hesitation. The data did not lie. More proof came from the harbor itself. Cameras mounted along the docks captured my son and his wife disembarking days earlier. They walked calmly, bags in hand, faces relaxed, not the least bit frantic or broken with worry. To the public, they played the roles of devoted children begging for help. But the cameras revealed the truth. Their composure was a mask, one that would not survive the light of evidence. My lawyer came to see me at the clinic, his briefcase heavy with papers that rustled like thunder when opened. His face was grave, the kind of expression I had only seen when we faced hostile takeovers years ago. He laid the documents before me and spoke in a measured voice. One day, after you were reported missing, your son filed an urgent request to the bank. He demanded the early release of part of the trust fund. The words struck me harder than the waves had. My son, not even waiting for confirmation of my fate, already reaching for what was mine. The email attached to the request was even more damning. It read with chilling certainty, "The situation no longer requires mother's name." A sentence cold as stone, slicing through the last remnants of maternal hope I had clung to. He had not hesitated, not mourned, not searched. He had acted as though I were already dead. My lawyer reminded me of the clause I myself had insisted upon years ago. Any heir suspected of causing harm to the benefactor would be disqualified, cut off from inheritance immediately. At the time, it had been a precaution, a distant thought. Now it felt like foresight carved into iron. I chose silence as my armor. While the newspapers speculated and the whispers spread through social circles, I gave no statement, no appearance. Outwardly, I was the frail widow recovering from a misadventure at sea. In truth, behind closed doors, I was working hand in hand with my lawyer and the investigators. Every meeting was quiet, discreet, timed to avoid attention. They thought they had written my ending, but I was already scripting the next act. From my bag, worn from years of travel, I pulled out the small waterproof phone I always carried when near the ocean. Its surface was scratched, its casing plain, but inside it held the seed of their downfall. I played the recording, and the room fell into a hush. The voice of my daughter-in-law, honeyed yet venomous, slipped from the speaker. "Stay forever and make friends with Monkey." The officers exchanged glances, their pens frozen mid-air. My lawyer's eyes, sharp behind his glasses, met mine with unspoken understanding. This was not hearsay, not suspicion. It was her own voice, her own malice captured in the moment of betrayal. That single sentence, spoken in cruelty, now stood as undeniable proof. With the GPS logs, the harbor cameras, and the reckless email, the puzzle was complete. Their story of accident and misfortune would collapse under the weight of truth. And I, the woman they had tried to bury in silence, now held the blade of evidence steady in my hands. We agreed the moment had to be chosen with precision. My lawyer leaned across the desk, his tone steady but edged with anticipation. "Do not return quietly," he said. "Return when they believe they have already won." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. Appearing too soon would only spark excuses, denials, another web of lies. But if I walked in when their pride was at its peak, when the room was full of witnesses, the blow would land so hard it could never be undone. So the plan was set. My son and his wife had arranged a grand reception, a gathering of investors, friends, and society figures, where they would hint at their new control of the family fortune. They wanted admiration, envy, respect. Instead, they would receive exposure. Behind the scenes, my lawyer prepared the evidence, the recordings, the documents, timed to appear at the exact moment of their self-congratulation. The authorities would be waiting, cameras rolling, and I would be the final act. In the mirror, I practiced my calm, the poise I had perfected in boardrooms. No rage, no tears, only the dignity they thought age had stripped away from me. I would walk into their celebration not as a victim returned from the sea, but as a reckoning. They had plotted to erase me, yet it was I who would end their story in front of the very audience they sought to impress. The ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers, every table dressed in white linen and adorned with roses that smelled too sweet. My daughter-in-law floated through the room like a queen crowned in borrowed jewels, her gown glittering, her laughter bright and hollow. She embraced friends, kissed cheeks, and raised her glass with the ease of someone who believed victory was permanent. Around her, investors leaned in, eager to hear about the new venture she promised would reshape their future. She spoke with rehearsed confidence, dropping hints that the fortune was already secure, already transferred into hands more capable than mine. My son stood beside her, smiling stiffly, his arm looped through hers. He nodded at every word, a silent echo of her ambition, and let the applause wash over them both. Guests clapped politely, some with admiration, others with envy, as if watching a coronation. My family members whispered among themselves, unsettled yet reluctant to question the display. The arrogance in the air was suffocating, a perfume of pride and greed that filled every corner of the room. They believed the performance complete, the crown firmly on their heads. They did not see the cracks beneath the gold, did not hear the footsteps of truth drawing near. To the guests, it was a night of triumph, but to me, watching from the shadows of what was to come, it was the stage perfectly set for their collapse. The lights dimmed and the chatter softened as the projector hummed to life. On the grand screen, my daughter-in-law's carefully edited video began, filled with smiling faces and congratulatory messages from so-called partners. Applause rose, glasses lifted, and she stood taller, basking in her moment. But then, with a flicker, the image shifted. No glittering logos, no staged blessings, only the rough footage of a fishing boat rocking on open water. The guests leaned forward, confused, as the camera revealed me, haggard and sunburned, being lifted from the sand by the fisherman's steady arms. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My son's smile faltered, his knuckles whitening around the stem of his glass. Before anyone could speak, another sound filled the room. My daughter-in-law's voice, clear and unmistakable, slipped from the speakers. "Stay forever and make friends with Monkey." The words, once whispered like a dagger in my ear, now echoed through the hall like a sentence. The applause died instantly. Forks clattered against plates. A silence heavier than stone pressed over the room as every eye turned toward the couple at the center. My daughter-in-law's face drained of color, her practiced poise collapsing into horror. My son lowered his gaze, shoulders hunched, caught in a net of evidence he could not tear apart. What had been a celebration only seconds ago had frozen into a courtroom, and the audience no longer saw heirs to fortune, but architects of betrayal. The heavy doors swung open with a groan, and every head turned as I stepped inside. I wore a gown of deep emerald silk, its fabric catching the light, chosen not for vanity but for the statement it carried: resilience, dignity, survival. My steps were steady, heels striking the marble floor in rhythm with the stunned silence that filled the hall. I could feel their eyes on me, wide with disbelief, as though I had walked back from the grave itself. My son's glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor while my daughter-in-law staggered back, her lips parting but no sound emerging. I did not rush. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of my presence settle over them like a tide. Then my voice rose, calm and clear, cutting through the air. "You thought I had disappeared, but the truth never disappears." My words echoed against the walls, and for a moment it was as if the entire room held its breath. Then the applause began, hesitant at first, then swelling into a roar as guests rose to their feet. Phones lifted into the air, flashes lit the room, and my image was captured again and again, no longer as the widow they tried to erase, but as the woman who had returned unbroken. The scene was no longer theirs to control. It was mine, and I stood in it with every ounce of the authority they had underestimated. My lawyer stepped forward, his presence commanding even among the glittering crowd. He carried no theatrics, only the calm weight of fact. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "the evidence is clear. The yacht's GPS shows the exact course, anchored at the island, then sailing directly back to port without a single attempt to search." The screen behind him lit up with the data, lines of coordinates tracing a damning path. Murmurs rippled through the room. Next came the footage from the harbor cameras. The projection showed my son and his wife walking down the dock, relaxed, composed, their bags neatly packed. Not a trace of panic, not a sign of grief. The whispers grew louder, outrage stirring in the crowd, and then the final blow. An email, read aloud, sent by my son to the bank just a day after I was declared missing. "The situation no longer requires mother's name." The words glowed on the screen like fire, scorching away every last defense they might have clung to. My daughter-in-law lunged forward, her voice sharp with desperation. "Lies, all lies!" she cried, waving her arms as though she could claw the truth back into shadows. But each denial was drowned by the cold clarity of the evidence, each excuse shattered as the images rolled on. Her poise crumbled, her mask slipped, and before the eyes of family, friends, and society, she stood exposed, trembling in the harsh light of truth. Her screams cut through the ballroom like shards of glass. I did not move as she clawed at the air, her voice cracking with denial, insisting the evidence was false, that she was innocent. But before the crowd could even murmur, the doors burst open, and officers of the Coast Guard strode in with solemn authority. Their uniforms gleamed under the chandeliers, their presence final. In a swift motion they seized her arms, ignoring her flailing, her pleas dissolving into incoherent shrieks as they dragged her toward the exit. My son stood frozen, his face drained of color, his glassy eyes fixed on me as though he were seeing me for the first time. Then he stumbled forward, his voice trembling. "Mother, forgive me, please. I was weak. I was misled." He reached out, but I stepped back, my voice calm, unshaken. "Forgiveness, yes, but trust will never again be yours." The words left my lips with the weight of a verdict, and he sagged, crushed beneath them. The crowd watched in silence, then in whispers that carried like fire. Phones recorded every moment, their lenses capturing the fall of those who once thought themselves untouchable. My daughter-in-law's cries faded down the corridor. My son bowed in shame, and the image of them being led away seared itself into memory. Around us, the air thickened with judgment, and I felt not triumph but clarity. Their empire of lies had collapsed in the brightest of lights, before the very society they had sought to impress. The downfall came faster than even I imagined. My daughter-in-law's arrest was not confined to the four walls of that glittering ballroom. Phones had captured every second, and within hours her image was plastered across social media feeds, replayed with captions that burned like fire. The headlines followed swiftly. "Socialite daughter-in-law plotted to abandon billionaire mother-in-law on deserted island." The words rolled across every major outlet, and with them her reputation dissolved. Friends who once crowded her parties now turned their backs. Invitations dried up, whispers sharpened, and she became a pariah draped in disgrace. My son's collapse was quieter but no less brutal. Investigators unearthed his debts, staggering numbers tied to reckless coin ventures, failed high-risk trades, and nights lost at gambling tables. The illusion of a successful businessman shattered, leaving only a man drowning in ruin. Then came the blow from the very will they had tried to twist. By its clause, any heir proven to have plotted harm was stripped of inheritance. His name was struck, his claim erased in ink more permanent than blood. The creditors circled swiftly. Calls, letters, threats, all came in waves, demanding repayment he could never meet. His accounts were frozen, his assets seized, the wealth he once flaunted reduced to dust. For the first time he saw his future stripped bare. No fortune, no allies, no applause, only the ruins of his own choices. In the quiet of my thoughts, I felt no need for vengeance beyond what was already unfolding. Karma does not wait patiently. It arrives beneath chandeliers, in the very moment they believe their victory is complete. They built their tower of lies too high, and it crumbled under its own weight. I stood on the deck of the yacht, the sea stretching endlessly beneath a sky bathed in violet light. The glass of red wine in my hand caught the fading sun, glowing like an ember of everything I had endured. The air was quiet, broken only by the soft lap of waves against the hull. I breathed it in, not as the victim who had been left to die, but as the woman who had returned, unbroken. My voice rose within me, steady as the tide. They thought old age meant weakness, but old age is experience, the knowledge of when to stay silent and when to strike. I have preserved my dignity, yet I cannot help but wonder, does victory always equal happiness? The question lingered, heavier than the wine, unanswered as the horizon swallowed the sun. Around me the world seemed suspended. The yacht no longer carried echoes of betrayal, but the promise of solitude reclaimed. My reflection shimmered on the surface of the wine, and I thought of the price of survival, of the cost of justice. Some wounds close, others remain as scars, reminders that strength often grows in the cracks where love once lived. If this story touched you, share it to remind others that pride and justice never fade. Believe that even after the cruelest betrayals, peace can still be found when we choose to guard the value of who we are.